Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Francis, for the invitation to come and talk. It was interesting when I was listening to June's talk, because there were some sort of points there that really resonated with my own personal history. As you can undoubtedly tell from my accent, I am not from around here. So I grew up in the US, and I went to university at a place called Haverford College, which is just down the road from Bryn Mawr. So I took some courses at Bryn Mawr. I, of course, was aware when I was there as a young woman studying mathematics of the history of Bryn Mawr College, but it's really fabulous to see it presented here as so fundamental in the development of women in mathematics in the States. And then I went on and did my PhD at the University of Chicago, and I had no idea that the University of Chicago had been so advanced in its thinking. So I actually started my PhD at Chicago in 1992, which is exactly when these quotes were that were a bit shocking. So I think that I've been fortunate to have seen tremendous changes both in the United States and in the UK in terms of the status of women within mathematical sciences, but still quite a long ways to go. So I just thought I'd start out, I don't know, just give sort of a primer and some things that I've been thinking about recently in my diversity work. So the first thing, I think there are a lot of terms that are used in diversity work, and in particular, so I thought I'd sort of clarify some of those. First of all, something that has been sort of raised to me recently is the difference between equality and equity. And so this is the photograph that somebody showed me, or the picture that somebody showed me when I admitted that I didn't actually know what the difference was. I thought of equity as something having to do with cash in a company or something anyway, but it's come to mean something different within the equality, diversity, inclusivity, or equity, diversity, inclusivity framework. And so I think this is one of the shifts that's been happening just in the last couple of years in terms of people's thinking around what we might call EDI, this acronym EDI, is thinking about equity rather than equality. And in particular, not everybody has the same struggles. If we think about the quote that Gauss had about Sophie Germain, thank you. Having had to overcome so many more difficulties to get where she was than a man would have had to do, that there are still aspects of diversity that require people to have so much more trouble getting somewhere. And so I think when we're thinking about supporting people in diversity, what we're really looking at is trying to provide equity for diverse people, not merely equality. Another thing that I think has become quite current right now is to talk about inclusion. So in EDI, it used to be equality and diversity was what we talked about. Now we talk about equality, diversity, inclusion. And I think that the idea there is that just to have diversity isn't enough if you're not finding a way to include those diverse people within the inner workings. So perhaps we could think of this in terms of whether you've got women members or whether you've got women on your board. So this is a chart that I pulled up. My Google skills are second to none, but I thought it did a nice job. So in diversity, we're just asking who's here. We're looking for people with different demographic characteristics. But when we're thinking about inclusion, we're thinking, well, why is it that we want people with diverse characteristics? It's because people with diverse characteristics have diverse perspectives, diverse talents, diverse backgrounds that actually make us stronger as teams. And so when we start thinking about inclusion, we're starting to think about diversity as a resource, as something that we want to integrate, that we want to make part of what we're doing, an important part of what we're doing, because of its strength, the strength that it gives to organizations and to projects. Just moving to the bottom, I would say, it's a difference between just having people there and having people that we value in our organization. this is another thing that I think is quite important, and I think also reflects some of the things that June was talking about, where people would talk about for women to be doing mathematics, they must have manly qualities, right? And I remember certainly when I was a young researcher in mathematics being told that I couldn't show people that I didn't feel confident. I just had to act confident, and nobody wanted to hear about my neuroses and just, whatever. And I really felt throughout a large proportion of my research career that I sort of had to put on my game face. I had to put on my male macho game face before I went to a conference or a workshop. And so I think there's also this thinking now about it's not so much that we want a bunch of people who look different, who all act like the stereotypical mathematician. We actually want people who are different. We want to make our workplaces and our teams places that those people feel comfortable. Sometimes you'll hear, I think not so much from younger people, but I frequently hear this from old white men who are talking about how liberal they are, saying, I just treat everyone the same. And my reaction is, okay, well, who are you treating everyone like? Right? I mean, are you treating everybody like a white, single British male? Because if so, then that is not really what we're going for, right? So I think that that's a lot of what we really need to address right now in the mathematical sciences and the sciences in general is getting over this idea that there's a single way to be a scientist or a mathematician, that there's a single personality that's the right personality for being a mathematician. And so going from this situation, so exclusion, maybe, we've moved from exclusion, right? But I think for much of my career, it's been a matter of assimilation, that if you want to be a woman who succeeds in mathematical sciences, then you have to learn to behave like a man, right? Now, I don't really agree with this behaving like a woman, behaving like a man, but I did feel that I had to behave like someone who wasn't me, that I couldn't be my true self in the context of my research life. And I think so there's a lot of the work now in terms of thinking about assimilation versus inclusion, right? And I would say this is also, I know this is about women in data science or women in operational research, but this is also something that is quite in the discussion right now, is also about Black and minority ethnic members of our community and ensuring that those individuals also feel included. And there's a lot of evidence that they don't and that has negative outcomes for them and also for the community. So I think this is a really important difference to be thinking about. It's not about getting more people into our community who just look different. It's about having more true difference and welcoming more true difference into our community. All right, so we've heard a little bit about women in mathematics, sort of things internationally, societies internationally. So I would say that from my experience working at the London Mathematical Society, I sort of break down the roles that professional societies play in equality, diversity, and inclusivity into these three categories. And I've given some experiences, some examples here from some of the activities that are done at the London Mathematical Society. So one is just to increase the visibility of groups that may not be as visible, and recognition for the work done by those groups. So for example, we have an annual lecture featuring an esteemed woman mathematician. We have a group of set of profiles online called Success Stories in Mathematics that celebrate different careers, different individuals in mathematics careers. We fund Women in Mathematics Days, Girls in Mathematics, that's what GIM, Girls in Mathematics, and Diversity in Mathematics events. It's our first Diversity in Mathematics event this year. There is one going to be run around diversity in race and ethnicity at UCL. we're working quite a bit on diversifying prizes right now, that this is something, you talked about fellowship being something that you're struggling with. This is something that a lot of societies struggle with, is getting the level of representation in prizes and fellowship of women and minorities up to a reasonable proportion. And I would say that the Athena Forum has been, which is a body that has representatives from a variety of science, technology, mathematics, medicine, professional societies sort of working together. One of the things we've been really focused on, along with the Science Council in the framework, is trying to improve diversity in prizes, both thinking from the viewpoint of the organization that's awarding those prizes. How do you think about prizes? What are prizes for? What you want to recognize. But then also working with nominators, because something we found is that there are certain institutions that are very good at nominating people. They have a lot of experience. Everybody there learns from somebody else there how to nominate people. And then there are a lot of people who don't really feel enabled or qualified or have any sort of mentoring to help them learn how to make nominations. So we're trying to work on both sides of that. We've got a workshop coming up on the 6th of November in Newcastle for potential nominators, trying to work with potential nominators on supporting them to think about how do you go about nominating somebody for a prize. We also work with the newsletter, the London Mathematical Society newsletter, on just ensuring that there are articles that feature different aspects of diversity and a diversity of authors represented. So that's all in terms of recognition and visibility. The second is just practical support. So something that was brought up before, I think that was what John was talking about, is that you lose people who go on maternity leave and then they don't have adequate support when they come back. So we have a couple of programs at the London Mathematical Society. One is caring grants. So caring grants are small amounts of money given out to anybody who will sustain additional caring costs as a result of going to some sort of conference or event. So if, for instance, you've just had a baby and you're trying to get back and go, but you are nursing and you need to bring your mom with you to look after the baby while you're working, then that's an additional cost. Often when you're coming back from maternity leave, you're skint because babies cost a lot of money. So this is a small aspect of support that we've rolled out. Another thing is the Grace Chisholm Young Fellowships, named for Grace Chisholm Young, that we heard about. And these are just quite small monetary awards, but given to people who, for one reason or another, have a lapse in formal affiliation with an academic department. And it gives them a small amount of money to fund travel, but it also means that they have an email account at a university, they have an office to go to, they have some mentoring, and they have access to the library resources, which is a big deal if you're trying to continue with research. So those are some sort of small things that we do. They're not monetarily large, but they do have an impact. And we've had a number of Grace Chisholm Young Fellows who have gone on to quite good careers. And then advocacy is the other thing. And so I think this relates to some of the work that John was talking about. First of all, just within the organization, trying to clean your own house, make sure that the processes that are behind the way that you, run committees or decide who's going to be on committees, how you allocate funding, and so on and so forth. Those are sort of within the organization. But I think that there's other work that societies can do in driving culture change across the community in terms of what they make a big show about saying is important. So I think that's another very important role that societies can perform. And then reports such as the MSc work that's been done that I hope will at some point be released. Is that going to be written up and released? I don't know. Anyway, those sorts of reports are very useful, and the London Mathematical Society has just released a new report as well that I'll come to in a little bit. This is the Royal Academy of Engineering Science Council Diversity Inclusion Progression Framework. Again, this is, I gather that your society is, the OR Society is already involved with trying to improve itself and its EDI and using the principles here. If you're not familiar with this framework, it has 8 different areas: governance and leadership, membership and professional registration, meetings, conferences and events, education and training, accreditation and examinations, prizes, awards and grants, communications, marketing, outreach and engagement, employment and monitoring and measuring. So these are all areas in which they have different suggestions for how to progress and improve within the society. So I'm eager to hear how things come along with the Operational Research Society in that regard. I think it's a really fantastic framework, and I'm pleased to hear that you're engaging with it. Okay, so just from the London Mathematical Society, so LMS, incidentally, I realized I didn't spell that anywhere. Spelled that anywhere as London Mathematical Society. And I see a lot of young faces, so you may not be aware that there are 5 mathematical societies in the UK. The Operational Research Society is one, the Royal Statistical Society, the London Mathematical Society, the Institute for Mathematics and its Applications, and the Edinburgh Mathematical Society. And these 5 societies together form something called the Council for Mathematical Sciences, which is the primary body that engages with government consultations, for instance. Anyway, so the London Mathematical Society, the Women in Mathematics Committee of the London Mathematical Society, which, as June mentioned, was founded in 1999, has always had representatives from each of the 5 bodies on the Council for Mathematical Sciences. And we're just now looking for a representative from the Operational Research Society, and I've been trying to recruit while I'm here. But if you think you might be interested, please do shoot me an email. So these are some of the things that we've been involved with. So in 2017, we commissioned another benchmarking survey. So this was based on information from HISA, as well as information from Athena Swan applications from mathematical sciences departments in the UK. So it's really sort of trying to actually draw out evidence and practice from those applications and summarize the evidence base that we have for effectiveness. And I think it's a useful document, although one of the things is that we don't really yet have a good sense of what is effective on the large scale. Another thing I would point out is that we have a LinkedIn group called UK Women in Mathematics, which I encourage everybody to sign up for. This is something that we launched because we particularly wanted to maintain connections with women who were going into industry. So in general, it's much more simple to find women who are in academics, or anybody who's in academics. They usually have a website on their university webpage, and you can locate them, but it's much more difficult to keep track of people who have gone into industry, which means it's harder both to support them and to collect information on what the situation is. So I very much encourage you to check out the UK Women in Mathematics LinkedIn page. The London Mathematical Society also has a set of diversity statements, policies, and advice. A statement on women in mathematics, a statement on diversity in mathematics, advice on diversity at conferences and seminars, and so on and so forth. And I would definitely recommend for anybody who's running a conference or seminar, or for the Operational Research Society, if you don't already have something, please do take a look at what's been put together here. As I said, it's something that has been put together with the contribution of people from the Operational Research Society, so hopefully it will be of use. So I just did a little Googling, and you probably already know that there is a Women in Operational Research and Management Science Society in forms in the US. So probably worthwhile checking that out as well. Okay, so now I think I switched the two slides around, so I'm just going to go like this. Okay, women's careers. Right, so yeah, if we look at the data from the most recent benchmarking survey, so June showed you the information from the first two benchmarking surveys that the London Mathematical Society commissioned. This is the 2017 data. And so this is for UK domiciled mathematical sciences graduates, researchers, and academics who are UK nationals by gender. And so what we see from this data, so 38% women at first degree, 33% at master's, 21% at doctorate, 21% at researcher, 21% at permanent academic role below professor, and 10% at professor. So what's interesting here is that we really see two main points of drop-off, right? The first is getting people into the profession. This is into academics, which the doctorate for academics is really the primary route. And the second is, okay, then we putter along just fine, but then women really struggle to make it up to that final level in terms of professors. And so I think that was reflected in some of the other information that we saw earlier as well. And in industry, so this is just general industry. This is from a McKinsey report. I think it's McKinsey. Yeah, McKinsey's Women Matter report from 2016. So this is across industry, not just in operational research, but you had some data, I think, for OR. That, in fact, if we look at women, at what proportion of individuals in executive in business are hoping to get promoted to the next level, it's roughly the same for men and women, a little bit higher for women, 68% versus 67% for men. The proportion that are hoping to become a top executive is a little bit more skewed. 48% of women are hoping to become a top executive versus 44% of men, right? So it's definitely not that women are not ambitious. That is not the issue, right? But when you look at what proportion believe that they're going to be able to get there, only 25% of women think that there's any chance that they will become a senior executive versus 42% of men. And if we look at the figures, as John was presenting, we see, in fact, that women are not represented well in the top of the profession. So whether in academics or in mathematics, whether in academics or in industry, we really see that there are two main issues. One is just getting people in the door, although that's not as bad, but we're really struggling to get people that last step into positions, in the highest positions. Okay. All right, so I was just talking about this. So this is a study that I'm currently doing. It's called the Academic Career Pipeline in UK Mathematical Sciences. So a lot of people talk about the pipeline, right? And when we talk about the pipeline, usually we mean something like this, which is about who is in, we think of the pipeline as being first degree, master's, doctorate, researchers, academics, and then senior academics. But what this isn't any information about how people move through the pipeline, right? So the 10% of professors are not necessarily, any of them, coming from the 21% who were doctorates a while ago, right? And especially we see a lot of movement in and out of the country. And so if I look at my department of mathematics at Loughborough University, we have a lot of women. None of them are British. So this is what we're aiming to look at with this study, is trying to understand actually how people move through the pipeline in a dynamic way. So we're investigating the average progression through academic ranks as a function of gender, but as well as a function of moves, because there's a conjecture that mobility, differences in mobility may be part of the reason that we see differences in academic progression between men and women. So this is to sort of test that. Do we see that moves in and out of the UK, in and out of academia, or between institutions are associated with faster progression? We're also looking at the influence of career breaks, including childcare responsibilities and also part-time working. So this is a survey. I'm just finishing putting it together and getting all of my institutional ethics approval. So hopefully we'll be launching it this afternoon, not this afternoon, this autumn. And it would be fantastic if we could disseminate through the Women in OR network. Although we're aiming to survey men and women who are currently in academic positions in OR or other aspects of mathematical sciences. And then eventually we're hoping to extend to other disciplines and as well look outside academics, but we have to think how that would work and how that would make sense. And I talked to somebody earlier who's not helping me out at all by raising his hand. There he is, about some work that you're doing in the Nuclear Decommissioning Agency, right? Yeah. That's similar. So hoping to link this up. All right, so what is that? What is diversity? Where are we in terms of diversity for women? The next thing I wanted to talk about are mechanisms of inequality. So this is something that I've been thinking about a lot more recently, is reading through a lot of academic literature to try to understand what is going on. Why is it actually that we see these differences? And so, of course, I think probably most people are aware of the concept of implicit or unconscious bias. So there's been a lot of information about that. So implicit or unconscious bias is the fact that people act on the basis of prejudice and stereotypes without intending to do so. And something I would say is that this is a natural consequence of abstract thought, right? Anytime that you create an abstraction out of a set of instances, there is some generalization going on there. And we see this, of course, in machine learning. There's a lot of discussion right now about bias in machine learned algorithms. So it's not surprising that this happens. It's not something that we have to blame people for, but it is something that is very entrenched and very difficult to do anything about. So the real discussion at the moment is how do we interrupt those actions, right? So in particular, I have had somebody say to me, I don't notice gender. This is just after he said I couldn't get a promotion. I've also heard people say, I don't notice race. And basically, those are nonsense statements, right? That's complete nonsense. Everybody notices gender, and everybody notices race, right? The question is, are you aware of the ways in which this affects your thinking and your decision-making, or are you unaware of the ways in which it affects your thinking and decision-making? I would definitely suggest that anybody at all, test your own biases. There's a website you can go to called Project Implicit from Harvard. This is a sort of well-developed tool for helping people to explore what implicit biases they may have. And again, it's not something you have to feel guilty about, but it's something to be aware of about the way that you think and operate in the world. And one of the things that has come out of the research, I guess there's a book that came out recently, Fast Thinking and Slow Thinking, that it's particularly in situations in which we're asked to make a decision under pressure that we're likely to be influenced by implicit bias. So I would definitely recommend, if you're ever in a position to change the way decisions are made, encourage there to be a way in which to add time for digestion and to really think through the ways in which implicit bias may be involved. Okay, so for an example about how implicit bias affects decision making, so this is a 2012 study by Moss and Racusin et al. And this was a randomized double-blind study within science faculties where individuals were given application materials of a student So the application materials were the same. The sets of application materials were the same, but these application materials were randomly assigned either a male or a female name for a position as a laboratory manager. And they found that selectors rated the male applicant as significantly more competent and hireable than the female applicant. Also chose a higher starting salary and offered more career mentoring to the male applicant. So this is the sort of thing that looking at the very same information, people interpret in a different way. There's also evidence that implicit bias affects productivity. And this is actually, this example is from within racism rather than sexism, but I would definitely encourage the ORS to think about race and ethnicity as well, especially within your gender work. Often women of color feel that work around gender is focused on the needs and interests of white women. So be very conscious to include and to talk to your ethnically diverse colleagues. Okay, so there's this concept of aversive racism. So this is the denial of personal prejudice. So people who say, oh, I'm not prejudiced, while at the same time holding unconscious negative feelings and beliefs. So basically unconscious biases about race that lead them to avoid interaction with other racial and ethnic groups. And people have studied aversive sexism as well. And this is really interesting to me. So in a study that was done, and I don't remember the name of the person who did it. The link is right here. I'll circulate the slides later. So in a study of the effects of overt and aversive racism on group problem solving, teams with one black and one non-prejudiced white member, so where they did a bunch of measures of both subconscious, unconscious, and overt racism. So so for whites who scored low both on the unconscious and overt racism scales, when they were teamed up with a black partner, they were the quickest to solve a problem. It took them 4 minutes and 35 seconds to solve a problem. This was a mathematics problem. What was interesting is that interracial teams with an overtly prejudiced white were next most efficient at 5 minutes and 45 seconds, and teams with an aversive racist were the least efficient. So not only does it affect your decision making, it also affects the efficiency of teamwork. And this is the sort of effect also that has a knock-on effect for people of other races, which is that they're found to be in teams that are not as productive, and then they're blamed for that effect when in fact it's an artifact of the fact that there's racial antagonism going on. Okay, this is a study that just came out, done by somebody actually at Loughborough, together with some colleagues, which studied women in business in terms of how they were prepared for leadership, and found that women and men had very unequal preparation for leadership. In particular, men were advised to think about the bigger picture and become visionary in their roles, whereas women were advised to focus on specific technical expertise and to deliver rather than to develop vision. Women were told to be more confident. Boy, this one just always irritates me. Told to be more confident, painting them as fundamentally lacking self-belief, with little advice about how to change this, compared to men who were told to develop their confidence in specific skills, which portrays them as more fixable and also gives them much more actable advice. And finally, men were encouraged to get involved in office politics and develop their networking and influencing skills to achieve leadership ambitions, whereas women were told to be more resilient and instead to focus on teamwork, cooperation, and being deferential to others. So obviously, this is another way in which inequality is generated from implicit bias. Is in terms of the way in which people are advised about things. So something that can help with this is mentoring, although I would say that there's also a lot of evidence that, quote, women get mentoring and men get sponsorship, right? So I think that this is something that definitely is a role for women in OR network, is to develop this sort of, make sure that the people are getting the right advice rather than the advice that they may get in their workplaces otherwise. Okay, and now you get to hear my rant of the year. So there's a new a philosophy of maths person at my university, Fenner Tanswell, who's put me on to this work on meritocracy, and I've really, I really can rant about this for hours. I'll try not to. But so meritocracy, I think we're brought up to think of meritocracy as the best system, right? I mean, how better to do things than the people who are the most meritocratic, thank you, not me, obviously, to be given the power, to be given the rewards, right? But the problem is that the concept of meritocracy and claims of meritocracy have been shown in many, many studies to undermine equality and reinforce bias. Okay, so there's this thing called the paradox of meritocracy. There's a very influential paper that came out with this title. And this refers to the fact that an emphasis on meritocracy in hiring and promotion decisions, in fact, leads to greater bias in decisions. Okay. So you can ask, why should that be the case? Why would it be that thinking about meritocracy makes people more biased in their decisions? And one of the things that the authors point to is recent studies on cognitive bias and stereotyping have found that in contexts in which people are led to feel that they are unbiased, fair, or objective, they are more likely to behave in biased ways, right? So for example, if you allow people to disagree with a bunch of racist or sexist statements before making a set of decisions, they are then more likely to be influenced by negative racial or gender stereotypes when they make those decisions. Okay? And there are two reasons that they hypothesize for this, two mechanisms. One is that individuals are more prone to express prejudiced attitudes when they feel that they've established their moral credentials as a non-prejudiced person. Okay? So you give them the chance to say, oh, no, I'm not a racist. I just don't happen to like that black person, right? Anyway, right? I know that you all can feel this rant building up in me and probably in yourselves as well, right? So, so this sort of, that part of behaving in appropriate ways is about the impression that people have about the people making those decisions. And if you allow them to feel like they can feel good about who they are, then they go and do their dodgy, skivy stuff, right? Okay. Another possibility, or another thing that comes into this, they propose, is that when people feel objective, they become more confident that their beliefs are valid, and thus more likely to act on them. Okay? So this is something I feel like in science and in mathematics and mathematical subjects is hugely problematic. This is a huge issue in culture, which is that often people who are in quantitatively based subjects, right, we know that 2 + 2 is 4, right? Everything, we know it's right, we know it's wrong. We become very convinced of our ability to make objective decisions about things, okay? But when you're talking about judging the quality of people's work or the importance of people's work, that is not a mathematical judgment. That is a social judgment. So I think particularly people in quantitative disciplines are lured into thinking that they are objective because within the realm of decisions about decisions about the correctness of things about mathematical statements, they can be quite confident. But then they imagine that transitions to other judgments that they may make in life. Okay, so we can see that this happens. Okay, so this is from a study of we just can't handle diversity is what this is called. This is from Harvard Business Review. So a Northwestern professor, Lauren Rivera, sat in on one firm's calibrations. These are interviewers' discussions about first-round job candidates. And she found remarkable discrepancies linked to race, ethnicity, and gender. And this is a chart showing the demographic breakdown of 7 through 3 candidates whose performance was questioned or debated in 4 critical areas: communication skills, sample business case analysis, math, and cultural fit. And you see that when you look at communication, for instance, that there's enormous discrepancy in the amount of scrutiny that these candidates were put through. So something that's not even discussed at all for a white, for a Hispanic, suddenly becomes a huge issue that we have to talk about, right? By the same token, if you look at math, right? So if you're Indian, oh, well, you must know how to do math. Everybody knows Indians are good at math, right? Whereas if you're either female or black, then we have to go through this in great detail, because obviously we have to make sure you really can do math, right? Okay. So this is one example where the bias comes into how much scrutiny is put in terms of different aspects of a candidate's ability. So another thing that happens is that the definitions of merit shift as we're going through discussions, right? So this is a study by Ullman and Cohen from 2005. Who found that in a recruitment context, merit was redefined to fit the profile of the candidate of the preferred gender. Okay? So in 3 studies, participants assigned male and female applicants to gender stereotypical jobs. However, they did not view male and female applicants as having different strengths and weaknesses. Instead, they redefined the criteria for success at the job as requiring the specific credentials that a candidate of the desired gender happened to have. Okay, so once again, this is people reinterpreting their decision in terms, having made it on the basis of bias, they then back interpret their decision in terms of something that they justify later. Okay. All right, so as I said, this is my rant. So I don't know, how many of you have heard about the blind orchestra auditions, right? So this is a fairly common case study. So this is work by Claudia Golden and Cecilia Rouse, who showed that changing orchestra auditions to being where you could see the performer to having the performer, the applicant performing behind a screen, changed the fraction of women in orchestras from under 10% to almost 40%. And they say, note that this did not result from changing mindsets. In fact, some of the most famous orchestra directors at the time were convinced that they didn't need curtains because they, of all people, certainly focused on the quality of music and not whether somebody looked the part. And the evidence told a different story. So in my experience, scientists and mathematicians are very similar. So I brought up this paradox of meritocracy to a particular member of my school who shall remain unnamed. And he wrote back an email saying, yes, but surely this is just in situations when it's not really merit you're talking about. And in situations where there's really a clear sense of merit, this can't possibly happen. Anyway, so so I hope that this at least gives you some ammunition when you run into people, that there are a lot of studies that show the mechanisms through which this happens. So one of the things that they recommend in particular is that the more stringent you are about how you're actually going to carry out decisions, how you're actually going to make decisions ahead of time, the better, right? Because you can't, they call this designing for diversity, right? So you have to design in these decision-making processes so that you can't what is the word? Justify your decision afterwards with some other reason, right? Because you can always, we're fiendishly nefarious, clever beasts up here in our heads. We can convince ourselves of all kinds of things that are not true. So you really, really have to design it into the way that processes occur. And so I'll just, again, from the same article, just read this out as well. Of course, believing that merit will be justly rewarded can come in handy for individuals. It's easier to muster the energy to overcome obstacles if you feel that you're on a well-earned, reasonably certain path to high achievement, and if you have an inflated sense of your own abilities. But this mindset also keeps people from investing in public solutions that expand the economic pie for everyone. Perhaps the biggest reason we cling to it is that when it's challenged, we feel attacked, as if our talent and effort are being dismissed. Talent and effort matter quite a bit, but very often they're not enough to ensure success. Changes in public policy and a dose of gratitude can help rectify inequalities, but we're a far cry from living and working in a meritocracy because our view of merit is so flawed. So I think something that comes out of here for me is this issue about having the energy to overcome obstacles if you feel you're on a well-earned, reasonably certain path. And I think quite often, both blacks and women are told that they need to just be more resilient, right? And that just really bugs the hell out of me because, you know, the amount of resilience that is required to get where you want to be is very different depending on your personal circumstances, right? And to assume that it's a lack of resilience rather than a context that requires an unreasonable amount of resilience is quite unfair. So I think that's what we need to aim for. Our ideal is an operational research society in which everybody has an equitable chance of success, in which people don't require exceptional amounts of resilience to succeed, that people can succeed by just putting in a good effort, that everybody can feel that they're on a well-earned, reasonably certain path, because the evidence is that not all of us equally feel that way. All right, so I'm just going to leave you with a few more resources, just so that they're in the slides and you can have a look at them. So one is a review that AdvanceHE did of literature on unconscious bias in higher education. So it's a nice report. It's worth looking through, and I really encourage you to look at the literature. It was many years before I started to look into the literature, and I found that it's really helped me to understand both what is happening and to have coherent and cogent arguments with people to put my case forward, but also to really understand what sort of interventions might possibly change things. Because I think quite often you see an effect and you're like, but you know, we've done this already, we've done this, what possibly is going to help? So I think it is really, really useful to get a sense of what the mechanisms are through which inequality is propagated. McKinsey and Associates, this is the McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm, have two really great reports as well. This is about diversity and women within the general commercial workplace. And let me see. One of the things I don't have up here is that one of the things that they found is that diversity, there's a huge amount of evidence that, as they say, it's observational, and therefore we have to be honest that we don't know that it's causal, but there's a huge amount of evidence relating diversity in organizations to success, and in fact, relating a lack of diversity to not doing very well. So there is a lot of evidence that diversity is correlated with success. And so diversity isn't just something that we should be doing because, you know, it feels good to be doing something right. It's also actually quite good for society to bring all of the different talents that people have and viewpoints that people have into our processes. So I think these are some good reports. Then there's a couple of reports that were produced by Murray Edward College called Women Collaborating with Men, and I realized that I had those in white and now they're in blue again, so it's difficult to see. But one is called Everyday Workplace Inclusion, and the other is called Inclusive Networking and Sponsorship, and that really talks particularly about this difference between mentoring and sponsorship. So again, these are some really good reports to look at. And that's it.